The ballroom exploded with flashbulbs as agents in navy jackets surged the stage. Reporters yelled questions. Donors scattered, and Alexander Pierce stood alone beneath a white-hot spotlight. A microphone tumbled, clattering like a gavel. Beside the cameras, Rachel Lawson wrapped her arms around a small boy whose face looked alarmingly familiar. Sirens wailed outside. Doors slammed. An agent unsealed federal warrants. Alexander's gaze locked with the child's, and something ancient moved behind his ribs. He sensed the future splitting open. The room held its breath. Some truths arrived like floodlights, others like handcuffs. Tonight would deliver both, without their permission. Before we unfold the saga of love, betrayal, and redemption, do one thing for the storyteller in you. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your voice sends a story farther than algorithms ever can. Tell us who you believe, who you forgive, and who must fall. Tap the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop a comment when a line hits your chest. Share with someone who lives for soulful drama. Ready? Deep breath. Let's begin, because every truth costs something, and tonight, the bill finally comes due. Stay to the end for a reveal worth arguing about all night. Alexander Pierce watched Manhattan from the Pierce Global Tower, a blade of glass chiseling the sky. People called him visionary, ruthless, inevitable. He called himself awake at 3 a.m., bargaining with the ceiling for sleep. Power should have felt like oxygen. Lately, it felt like smoke. He avoided reflections because they returned to strangers' eyes. Somewhere across the city lived a woman whose absence rewired his bones, a silence that never explained itself. He learned to speak quarterly and dream rarely. On paper, he was unstoppable. In private, he was inventorying losses no ledger could measure, not even love's equity. Rachel Lawson tied her hair, slipped into scrubs, and stepped into corridors that never rested. She was a physician families requested when rooms needed both science and mercy. Between charts and midnight coffees, she carried a private war. The decision that saved her child and cost everything else. Her apartment was small, orderly, and filled with laughter that didn't know why fathers leave. She never used her married name. She never explained Manhattan's tallest building to a curious 5-year-old. She practiced safety like a religion and hope like a stubborn habit. Love lived here, but history waited outside the door. Evelyn Pierce wore serenity like a brooch, pearls bright against immaculate posture. Charity boards applauded her poise. Society pages praised her taste. Locked drawers praised her silence. Years ago, she signed things she told herself were harmless, necessary, temporary. The family name would survive, and with it the illusion of goodness. When Alexander visited, she poured tea and edited sentences mid-air, steering conversation around history's sharp corners. At night, the house clicked and sighed like an old conscience. Sometimes she pretended not to hear it. Sometimes she drank until it stopped knocking. Most nights, it knocked until morning answered anyway. Richard Hale smiled with the calm of a surgeon and the ethics of a storm. He had been Charles Pierce Sr.'s protege, then architect of continuity. He preferred corridors to spotlights, pen strokes to speeches. When Alexander hesitated, Richard simplified. When regulators questioned, Richard clarified. He believed markets rewarded conviction and punished confession. Files obeyed him. Contracts respected him. People didn't need to like him. They needed a sign where he pointed. He called it stewardship. The word tasted clean, which is why he used it when his hands were dirty. Every signature widened his shadow across the company's walls. 5 years earlier, they were incandescent once. Two people building a future with thrifted furniture and expensive promises. Alexander drafted strategies on napkins. Rachel annotated them with dreams. Nothing about them felt borrowed. Even the quiet had music. He swore the company could be a lighthouse, not a refinery. She believed him because he believed himself. Love, they joked, would be their compliance department. Neither saw the undertow forming beneath their shoreline. Trust is a bridge until paperwork turns it into a weapon. One envelope would arrive, and the tide would pull everything under without mercy for them both. Inside the envelope, she found altered studies, bribery coded as consulting, shipment schedules plotted like invasion maps. At the bottom, Authorization pages bore Alexander's elegant signature beside Charles Pierce Sr.'s and Richard Hale's. Her pulse became percussion. She remembered Alexander's late-night calls, his distracted nods, his loyalty to a team that predated him. Betrayal felt colder than fear. Then the phone rang. A voice as calm as danger advised distance, silence, compliance. Rachel traced the signatures, memorized their angles, and realized love might not survive the math. Truth, suddenly, demanded evacuation, not conversation or patience. She tried to ask him that night without asking him. He kissed her forehead, promised one more call, and stepped onto the balcony where the city blinked like a complicated alibi. She waited, words crumbling in her mouth. When he returned, she folded fear into a smile and said goodnight. The next day, a second envelope arrived. Photocopies with his initials stamped like verdicts. She pressed both palms to her abdomen, bargaining with Providence. Decision is a bridge you cross exactly once. She packed a small bag, taped courage over panic, and rehearsed goodbye. The city kept blinking. She kept walking. Alexander filed a missing person report, then 1,000 what-ifs. Richard Hale placed a sympathetic hand on his shoulder and an explanation in his ear. Some people love power more than permanence. She found someone, Richard murmured, gentle as chloroform. Alexander deleted numbers, canceled searches, and built taller walls. The market applauded. His heart did not. There are losses you can price and losses that banker the language. He learned to schedule around anniversaries. He learned the geometry of loneliness. He learned nothing about why doors sometimes close without a sound. Sleep retreated. Questions advanced. Days arrived without color or mercy. Rachel rebuilt with quiet materials. Clinic shifts, secondhand furniture. Neighbors who minded their business and her child. She changed her last name back. Closed social accounts. Memorized exit routes. Daniel learned the city by bus schedules and playground textures. He collected small cars, big words, and questions she answered with careful truth. Some families look different, she would say, and he accepted it like weather. When nightmares visited, she held him until morning and promised safety she didn't always feel. Love did the heavy lifting. Fear handled logistics. Hope paid rent, monthly, even when doubt banged on the walls outside. Fate prefers public places. The hospital announced a fundraising gala. Pierce Global accepted with enthusiasm. Rachel volunteered for the late shift to avoid the ballroom, then covered a colleague's assignment because kindness was habit. Alexander rehearsed remarks about innovation and community while ignoring the ache beneath them. Evelyn selected a gown. Richard selected narratives. No one planned to meet. Everyone was walking toward it. Some nights end quietly. Others rewrite 5 years in a single breath, then demand witnesses and receipts. This night would choose the second option, and no one was ready for consequences. 5 years later, Rachel's alarm rang at dawn, pulling her from dreams that always ended in the same face, Alexander's. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath before Daniel stirred. Her mornings began with scrambled eggs, lunchboxes, and the walk to kindergarten. At the hospital, she wore her title like armor, Dr. Lawson, researcher and physician. Yet behind every chart lay shadows of her past. Families begged her for answers to painkiller addictions she couldn't reverse. She saved who she could, mourned who she couldn't, and prayed Daniel would never inherit the empire that had buried so many lives. Alexander's nights were haunted by silence. He sat in his penthouse, whiskey untouched, staring at Rachel's old photographs locked inside a drawer. He had searched for her. Private investigators, endless calls. But Richard's whispers had poisoned his mind. She left you. She found someone else. He wore bitterness like a crown, burying grief beneath steel resolve. Yet, every boardroom victory felt hollow. Shareholders praised his ruthlessness, but in hotel rooms afterward, he collapsed into empty sheets, whispering her name. He had become his father's son in the world's eyes, a titan without tenderness, a king of ash building castles over graves. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Rachel charted patient notes when a young man staggered in, trembling from withdrawal. His mother clutched her rosary, sobbing. They said it was safe, just pain relief. Now he's gone. Rachel's throat tightened. She had seen this story too many times. Patients promised comfort, delivered chains. She handed the mother tissues, whispering comfort she barely believed herself. Later, alone in her office, Rachel pressed her head against her desk. The files she once found flashed across her memory. Research falsified, lives calculated as profit margins. Every scream in her ward echoed why she left Alexander. Her choice still felt necessary. Daniel grew into a curious boy with questions Rachel dreaded. "Why don't I have a daddy?" he asked once, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Rachel forced a smile, brushing his hair gently. Some daddies work very far away. He accepted the answer with innocent eyes, then returned to his toy cars. Rachel exhaled shakily, guilt pressing heavy. She wanted him to know Alexander's warmth, but fear silenced her. If Hale's threats ever resurfaced, Daniel would be a target. So she built walls of bedtime stories, laughter, and gentle lies. Her love for him was fierce, but it was lonely too. In Manhattan's boardroom, Richard Hale tightened his grip on Pierce Global. He presented flawless graphs, soothing nervous investors with promises of growth. Alexander signed documents distractedly, never reading fine print. Hale thrived in that blindness, slipping poison into policies, ensuring profits soared, while bodies piled quietly. "Your father would be proud," Hale said once, a smile sharp as broken glass. Alexander nodded, weary, unaware those words were daggers. Hale kept everything under control, the board, the regulators, the narrative. But deep down, he feared one thing, Rachel's silence breaking. She alone carried the truth that could unravel him, and silence was never permanent. Evelyn Pierce sat at her vanity, adjusting pearls that suddenly felt heavier than gold. In her drawer lay copies of contracts she had signed years ago, statements denying harm, endorsements silencing lawsuits. She remembered Rachel standing in this very room, pleading, "Help me stop this. Think of the families." Evelyn's answer had been a cold whisper. The family must come first. That night haunted her. She watched the news now, patients collapsing, lawsuits whispered. Her conscience clawed at her, but she swallowed wine and hid the papers again. She had preserved the Pierce name, but in doing so, she buried truth. Brooklyn apartment. Rachel returned home late. Daniel asleep on the couch, crayons scattered around his coloring book. She knelt, kissing his forehead, whispering, "You're my whole world." Yet, fear always lingered. She checked the locks twice, pulled curtains shut, scanned the street for strangers. The voice on the phone years ago still echoed, disappear or lose everything. Sometimes, when footsteps echoed too close, she froze, clutching Daniel tight. She wondered if Hale still watched, if Evelyn still buried secrets. Love for her son was her shield. But the shadow of Pierce Global followed her like smoke, impossible to outrun completely. Alexander snapped at reporters outside the tower, a rare display of anger. "No questions today," he barked, shoving past microphones. In truth, whispers of lawsuits were mounting, families demanding justice. Investors murmured about instability, but Hale brushed it off as noise. Alone in his office, Alexander stared at contracts, searching for meaning. He found signatures he didn't remember, dates he couldn't place. Doubt festered. He wondered if Rachel's accusations had truth buried within them. Was he complicit without knowing? For the first time, suspicion gnawed at his loyalty to Hale. Questions began to rise, questions Hale feared most of all. A week later, the hospital buzzed with excitement as preparations began for the annual charity gala. Rachel tried to avoid it, volunteering instead for late shifts, but schedules betrayed her. She sighed, knowing she'd be assigned to the event. Daniel tugged her sleeve. "Can I come too, Mommy?" "I'll be quiet." The babysitter had canceled again, and she couldn't say no. "Stay close to me," she whispered, smoothing his shirt. She convinced herself it would be just another night of handshakes and speeches. She didn't know Alexander would also be there. Fate was moving pieces closer, and the collision could no longer wait. Pierce Global confirmed Alexander's attendance. Richard by his side, Evelyn prepared for her grand entrance. Cameras would flash, speeches would rehearse, but beneath it all, secrets stirred. Rachel rehearsed, keeping her head down, focusing only on patience. Daniel clutched his toy car, excitement bright in his eyes. Across the city, Alexander adjusted his cufflinks. Unaware he would soon see his son for the first time, Richard smiled privately, certain his grip on Pierce Global was secure. But fate had a habit of undoing plans. And tonight, under chandeliers, 5 years of silence would shatter in front of the world. The hospital's grand ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, violins weaving through the air. Donors mingled, glasses clinked, and polished speeches echoed across marble floors. Rachel balanced a tray of champagne, her dress simple but neat, Daniel by her side clutching his toy car. She had begged a babysitter, but no one was available. "Stay close to me," she whispered, forcing calm. Daniel nodded, wide-eyed at the dazzling lights. Rachel breathed deeply, telling herself this night would pass quietly. What she didn't know was that Alexander Pierce had already stepped inside, cufflinks gleaming, unaware his entire life was about to unravel. Across the ballroom, Alexander entered with Richard Hale at his shoulder, photographers trailing. Flashes burst as voices called, "Mr. Pierce, look here!" He lifted his chin, his expression carved from steel. Richard whispered cues, reminding him of donors' names. Yet Alexander's attention wandered, scanning the crowd with restless energy. Then he saw her, Rachel. The tray in her hands trembled as her eyes widened, her face pale. 5 years collapsed in an instant. She turned quickly, tugging Daniel closer. Alexander's breath caught, his chest burning. The woman he thought lost forever, and the child she shielded, stood only feet away as cameras continued flashing. Rachel ducked her head, maneuvering toward the back hallway. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she whispered, clutching Daniel's hand tightly. But Daniel, curious, peeked at the towering chandeliers, his eyes glowing with wonder. Alexander's gaze dropped and froze. The boy's face reflected his own unmistakably. His pulse thundered, the room fading into silence. Richard followed his stare, instantly realizing the danger. "Walk away," Richard hissed under his breath. But Alexander couldn't. Every instinct pulled him forward. He crossed the floor, ignoring the whispers, until he stood before the boy. Kneeling, his voice cracked softly. "What's your name, little man?" Daniel clutched his toy car, glancing nervously at Rachel. "Daniel," he whispered. Alexander's heart clenched at the sound, his chest hollowing with shock. Richard muttered curses behind him, but Alexander barely heard. Time folded, 5 years rewriting themselves in the curve of a child's face. Rachel rushed forward, panic sharp in her eyes. "Daniel!" she cried, yanking him close, champagne tray crashing to the floor. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Alexander rose slowly, his face pale, his gaze locked on Rachel. Rachel. The name left his lips like a confession, aching, desperate. She turned away, clutching Daniel tightly to her chest. Outside the ballroom, guests whispered furiously as Rachel pushed toward the exit, Daniel's small legs struggling to keep up. Alexander followed, ignoring Richard's hissed protests. Outside, beneath marble pillars glowing with golden light, Rachel spun to face him, eyes blazing. "Stay away from us," she snapped, trembling. Alexander's voice broke. "Rachel, please, is he my son?" Silence hung heavy. Daniel's curious gaze darted between them, confusion clouding his innocent eyes. He tugged at Rachel's sleeve. "Mommy, is he my daddy?" The words shattered her composure. Alexander staggered back, breathless, as truth and heartbreak collided in the cold night air. Rachel's lips trembled. "Yes, he's your father." Alexander's knees buckled, the world spinning. 4 or 5 years he had lived with emptiness, blind to the truth that stood before him now. His eyes burned, his throat tight. He reached forward instinctively, but Rachel recoiled, clutching Daniel tighter. "Don't," she whispered fiercely. "You don't get to touch him. Not after what you did." Alexander's chest heaved. "Rachel, I didn't." Richard stormed outside, interrupting with a practiced smile for lingering reporters. "Enough," he barked. "Mr. Pierce," back inside. But Alexander ignored him. His world wasn't in the ballroom anymore. It stood before him, shaking. Security lingered nearby, but the whisper spread like wildfire. That's his son. She disappeared years ago. Isn't that Rachel Pierce? Rachel turned sharply, pulling Daniel away. Alexander followed, desperation in his voice. Rachel, listen to me. She spun, eyes fierce. Why should I? I saw your name on those papers. You chose money over people, over me. Alexander's breath caught, pain flickering in his eyes. I never signed them, he insisted. But Rachel shook her head, tears burning. Daniel pressed close, frightened. Mommy, what's happening? He whispered. Rachel kissed his forehead, whispering, It's okay, sweetheart, though her heart thundered with panic. Outside the hospital gates, Rachel hurried Daniel into a cab, her hands trembling as she buckled his seatbelt. She glanced back. Alexander stood in the street, rain beginning to fall, his suit darkened by droplets, his face pale with devastation. Rachel, please, he shouted, his voice breaking. But the cab pulled away, leaving him behind. Inside, Rachel pressed Daniel close, her tears slipping silently. Mommy, why was he calling your name? Daniel asked softly. Rachel kissed his hair. Because some ghosts don't stay buried, she whispered. Her chest ached but resolve steeled. She had to protect her son, no matter how much her heart wanted otherwise. Alexander stood frozen in the rain, Richard tugging at his arm. Forget her. Forget the boy. They're nothing but a liability. Alexander's jaw clenched, his fists trembling. He's my son, Richard. My blood. Richard sneered. And what will that change? Rachel will never forgive you. She knows the truth. Alexander spun, his eyes blazing. No, she knows your lies. You forged my name, didn't you? Richard's mask cracked for an instant before forming into a smirk. Careful, Alex. You're playing with fire. But Alexander no longer feared flames. For the first time, he saw Richard for what he was, the puppeteer. Later that night, Rachel sat at the edge of Daniel's bed, stroking his hair as he slept, her own tears dampening the pillow. She had promised herself he would never know this pain. But the truth was out now. Across the city, Alexander locked himself in his office, scattered files before him, the signatures, the documents. They no longer felt like proof of betrayal, but evidence of a trap. His father's name appeared again and again beside Richard's and Evelyn's. His heart twisted. Rachel had suffered for lies built long before he understood them. And now, he swore those lies would burn. The morning after, Alexander hadn't slept. He sat in his study. Contracts sprawled across the desk, whiskey untouched. Rachel's voice haunted him. I saw your name on those papers. His hands trembled as he flipped through documents, noticing signatures he couldn't remember placing. He compared pen strokes, dates, margins. Something didn't add up. His chest tightened with dread. Could Hale have forged them? Rage burned hotter with every page. He whispered. Rachel was right to run. But then he thought of Daniel, his son, and hope lit faintly. He wasn't only fighting for truth now. He was fighting for the family he lost. Rachel brewed coffee in her small kitchen, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. Daniel played on the floor, humming softly. She couldn't stop replaying Alexander's face, the shock, the tears, the desperation. She had wanted to believe him once, but trust was a bridge burned long ago. Still, she remembered Evelyn's cold words. Stay silent for the family's sake. Rachel's jaw tightened. Evelyn had known. Maybe Alexander truly hadn't. Fear prickled her skin. If Alexander had uncovered something at the gala, Hale would notice. And Hale never let loose and survive. She hugged Daniel tighter. I won't let them touch you. Pierce Global Tower. Alexander stormed into the boardroom, contract in hand. Executives murmured nervously. Richard Hale leaned back, perfectly calm. What's this tantrum about? Alexander slammed the papers down. These signatures aren't mine. Hale's smile was cool. You signed them, Alex. Stress clouds memory. Alexander's fist struck the table. Don't lie to me. I want the originals. Hale leaned forward, voice sharp as glass. Be careful, son. If you dig too deep, you'll find skeletons you can't bury. The room chilled. For the first time, Alexander saw the truth clearly. He wasn't CEO. He was a puppet, and Hale held the strings. At the hospital, Rachel treated a woman trembling from withdrawal. They gave me these pills after surgery, said they weren't addictive. Now I've lost everything, she sobbed. Rachel squeezed her hand, rage simmering under her calm exterior. She remembered those contracts, those lies hidden in medical jargon. This wasn't abstract corruption. It was flesh, blood, ruined families. Later that night, she sat by Daniel's bed, her heart pounding. If Alexander truly fought Hale now, danger would rise. She prayed he would stop, but part of her, buried deep, prayed he wouldn't. Someone needed to burn Pierce global to the ground. Hale's penthouse. Richard Hale poured himself a drink. City lights flickering below. His phone buzzed. "Keep eyes on Rachel Lawson," he ordered coldly. "If she meets with Alexander again, shut it down." He ended the call, staring at the skyline. He had silenced whistleblowers before, buried lawsuits, bribed regulators. But Rachel was different. She had run, but she had returned. And worse, she carried Alexander's air. If the truth spread, Hale's empire crumbled. He smirked, masking the tremor in his hand. "You won't ruin me, Rachel. Not you, not him." For the first time, though, Richard felt something alien, fear clawing at his chest. Evelyn Pierce sat at her vanity, letters spread before her. Each bore her signature, approvals, dismissals, denials. She remembered the day Rachel came to her, pleading, "Families are dying. Help me stop this." Evelyn's reply still echoed, "The family comes first." Now, her silence condemned her. When Alexander burst in that evening, eyes blazing, she tried to speak. "Mother, you knew," he whispered. Her hands trembled. "I want to protect us." His voice cracked with fury. "You didn't protect us. You destroyed us." Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks, but Alexander turned away. In his heart, forgiveness was gone forever. Brooklyn apartment. Rachel noticed a man in a gray coat across the street, pretending to read a newspaper. Her stomach knotted. She pulled Daniel closer, locking the door behind them. Fear returned like an old enemy. That night, Daniel asked, "Mommy, why was Daddy crying?" Rachel froze. How could she explain corporate greed, betrayal, and forged signatures to a child? She kissed his forehead. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she whispered. When he fell asleep, she sat by the window, watching shadows. Somewhere, Hale's men were watching too. Her chest tightened. "If Alexander digs too deep," she whispered, "they'll come for us both." Alexander sat alone in his study, scanning old photographs. Rachel smiled Daniel's resemblance, Evelyn's lies, all swirled like ghosts. His phone buzzed. Rachel's voice cracked through the line. "Stop this, Alex. You'll get us all killed." His chest tightened. "Rachel, I have to." Hale forged everything. "I need to prove it, for you, for Daniel." Silence stretched. 1 hour, she whispered finally. "St. Clair's Park." She ended the call before he could respond. Alexander closed his eyes, gripping the phone. Tonight could end in truth or destruction. But he knew one thing. He would no longer live as his father's blind heir. St. Clair's Park. Moonlight glistened on the fountain as Rachel waited. Daniel asleep in the car nearby. Alexander approached, his expression weary but determined. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then he whispered, "I never signed those contracts. Hale forged them." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to believe you, but Evelyn, she told me to stay silent. I thought you were part of it." His voice cracked. "I was blind, not complicit. I swear it." She turned away, shaking. "Blindness still ruins lives, Alex. I couldn't let Daniel grow up in that shadow." Her voice broke, truth spilling with her tears. Alexander stepped closer, desperate. "Rachel, give me the chance to fight this. For you, for him." Her lips trembled. "And if you lose? If Hale destroys you?" At that moment, Daniel stirred, stepping out of the car, his small hands rubbing his eyes. "Mommy? Daddy?" he whispered, the words stumbling but true. Both froze, hearts colliding. For the first time in years, they stood side by side, their son between them. From the shadows, a camera clicked. Hale's men captured everything, evidence that Alexander's loyalty had shifted. Richard Hale smiled in his penthouse. The war for Pierce Global had just begun. The following morning, Alexander scoured old archives, his office buried in dust-coated boxes. His pulse quickened as he opened one labeled Pierce Pharma 2009. Inside were contracts with his father's elegant signature beside Hale's. He flipped pages faster, bow rising. At the bottom, another shock. Evelyn's signature, endorsing settlements, silencing lawsuits. His breath caught. His father had masterminded the empire's corruption. His mother had shielded it. The betrayal spread deeper than he'd imagined. Rachel hadn't abandoned him for selfish reasons. She had seen enough to know the empire was poisoned. For the first time, Alexander realized his family's foundation was built on rot. He sat back, hands trembling, staring at his father's name inked across pages like curses. For years, Charles Pierce Sr. had been his model of integrity, a legend investors worshipped. Now, Alexander saw the truth. His father's empire wasn't legacy, but crime disguised as progress. His chest tightened as he whispered, Rachel was right. Memories of Rachel's tear-stained face haunted him. She hadn't betrayed him. She had protected their son. Shame crashed over him. He had idolized a man who built thrones from broken families. The only question left was whether he could dismantle the empire without destroying himself too. Rachel's apartment. Rachel folded laundry, while Daniel played with toy cars on the rug. Her mind replayed the confrontation with Alexander, his broken voice, his desperate eyes. She had wanted to believe him once. She remembered pleading with Evelyn. Help me stop this. You know it's wrong. Evelyn's reply chilled her still. The family must come first. Rachel's throat tightened. Alexander had been blind, but his mother had been complicit. Fear clawed at her. Hale would not tolerate Alexander digging. She glanced at Daniel and whispered, I'll keep you safe. But for the first time, she wasn't sure safety was possible anymore. Richard Hale paced his penthouse, anger etched across his face. Reports confirmed Alexander had pulled old contracts, questioning signatures. He clenched his glass so tightly it cracked. Dialing a number, his voice was low and sharp. Keep Lawson under surveillance. If she speaks, we're finished. He hung up, forcing a smile in the mirror. Control was his religion, and cracks were blasphemy. Evelyn had warned him Alexander might resist, but he dismissed her. Now, Rachel's reappearance lit fires he couldn't extinguish. Hale poured another drink, whispering, Pierce won't ruin me. Not him, not her. Yet unease gnawed where confidence once lived. Evelyn's mansion. Alexander stormed into the study, papers clutched in his hands. Evelyn looked up from her wine, pearls trembling at her throat. Why? His voice cracked with fury. You signed these. You protected father's lies. You let Rachel suffer. Evelyn's eyes shimmered, guilt flickering. I did it for us, for you. Without silence, we'd have lost everything. Alexander's fists trembled. You didn't protect me. You chained me to his sins. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was trying to hold the family together. He turned away cold. You destroyed it instead. Evelyn reached for him, but his silence cut sharper than steel. Alexander drove across the city, files stacked in his passenger seat. He knocked on Rachel's door, exhaustion shadowing his face. She hesitated, Daniel peeking from behind her. What do you want? She asked. He placed the files on her table. Proof. My father's signature. My mother's too. And Hale's. Rachel flipped pages, her breath catching as she recognized them. Tears burned her eyes. So it was all true. Alexander's voice broke. I didn't betray you, Rachel. I was blind, but not guilty. Let me fight this. For you, for him. She stared, torn between fury and the faintest flicker of hope. Hale's shadow meeting. In a darkened club, Hale met with investors, his smile cold. Pierce is unraveling, he assured them. If he exposes a past, we all fall. He won't be allowed to. One investor leaned forward. And Rachel Lawson? Hale's jaw tightened. She's a liability. If she speaks, the board will turn. He slid photographs across the table. Alexander with Rachel and Daniel at the park. The family image is already fractured. We move now. Glasses clinked. Deals whispered. Hale leaned back, whispering to himself, if Pierce wants war, he'll get it. And this time I won't miss. Rachel sat across from Alexander, silence thick between them. Do you realize, she whispered, what those signatures cost me? I begged your mother. She turned me away. I thought you were just like them. His eyes filled. I wasn't, but I was too blind to see. And blindness cost us everything. He reached for her hand. She hesitated, then allowed his fingers to brush hers. For a brief moment, the wall cracked. Old warmth stirred, fragile and trembling. Rachel looked away quickly, whispering, this doesn't change the past. Yet in her chest, something dangerous. Hope breathed softly again. 2 days later, Daniel laughed in the park, chasing pigeons while Rachel and Alexander sat stiffly on a bench. He deserves better than this, Rachel murmured. Alexander nodded. He will have better. I'll give him truth. Her eyes narrowed. Truth is dangerous, Alex. Hale won't stop. Alexander's gaze followed Daniel, his chest tightening. Then let him come. I'll fight. Daniel trotted back, holding out a flower. Daddy, this is for you. The word pierced Alexander's chest, his eyes welling. He hugged Daniel tightly, whispering, thank you, son. Rachel watched silently, torn between fear of the storm and the fragile dream of family restored. From a black sedan across the street, Hale's men clicked photographs. Alexander holding Daniel, Rachel standing close. Later, Hale flipped through them, smirking. Perfect. The board will see where his loyalty lies now. He tapped the images, satisfaction darkening his eyes. Family weakness. Emotional compromise. Yet one picture unsettled him. Daniel's small hand and Alexander's. Hale shut the folder angrily. If they think they can rise against me, they're mistaken. He poured whiskey, whispering, Pierce blood or not, I'll crush them. For the first time, however, his hands trembled slightly. Fear had found its way into Hale's fortress of control. Hale's boardroom plot. Richard Hale convened a private meeting with board members, sliding photographs across the mahogany table. Images of Alexander embracing Daniel, Rachel close by. Hale's voice was calm, almost surgical. Pierce is compromised. Family distractions weaken leadership. Investors lose billions if this continues. Nervous glances traded across the room. One director muttered, he's unstable. Hale nodded gravely, concealing his triumph. I'll safeguard the company. He tapped the folder, voice dropping. But if he exposes our past, we all go down. The board members shifted uneasily, bound by fear more than loyalty. Hale's coup had begun, powered by shadows and whispers. Alexander entered the next morning, expecting routine. Instead, silence greeted him. Board members avoided his gaze, whispers biting like frost. Hale leaned back, smirking. Your personal distractions concern us. Alexander's chest tightened. You mean my son? My family? No one replied. Hale spoke smoothly. The company must remain focused. Sentiment is weakness. Rage boiled in Alexander's veins. Weakness is burying lives while lining pockets. Gasps rippled across the table. Hale's smile sharpened. Careful, Alex. Words like that invite ruin. For the first time, Alexander realized Hale wasn't just manipulating him. He was orchestrating his downfall in front of everyone watching. Rachel's apartment. Rachel returned home late, groceries in hand, only to freeze. Her front door slightly ajar. She stepped inside cautiously, heart pounding. Daniel's toys were scattered, but nothing missing. On the table sat a single manila envelope. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside were photos, herself, Daniel, and Alexander in the park. A note slipped free. Stay silent or you'll lose him. Rachel's knees buckled, terror flooding her chest. She clutched the photos to her chest, whispering, "Not again." She rushed to Daniel's room, finding him asleep, safe, for now. But fear's shadow returned, darker than before. Hale's warning had found her again. She locked the windows, checked doors twice, and curled beside Daniel, tears wetting her pillow. She remembered the first phone call 5 years ago, the voice that told her to vanish. Now, Hale had drawn the circle tighter. She couldn't keep running forever. Yet how could she fight him? In the darkness, she whispered, "I won't lose you, Daniel." Her heart cracked with conflict. Alexander was finally seeing the truth, but aligning with him meant painting a target on both their backs. She stared at her son's peaceful face and realized safety was an illusion Hale had already stolen. Alexander's study. Alexander traced his father's signature across contract again and again, while rising in his throat. He finally admitted it. Charles Pierce Sr. had been the architect of destruction. Evelyn had enabled it. Hale had extended it. And Rachel had been the one who saw it clearly first. Shame and fury intertwined in his chest. He whispered into silence, "Father, you ruined everything." His phone buzzed, an anonymous message with photos of Rachel and Daniel marked, "They're in danger. Walk away." Alexander's jaw clenched. He stood, fire burning in his eyes. "No," he growled. "This ends now. I'll destroy Hale." News outlets buzzed with leaks, rumors of internal corruption at Pierce Global. Investors panicked, shares dipped, and whispers grew louder. Alexander denied nothing, fueling suspicion. Hale stoked the fire, planting stories of family instability and reckless leadership. Evelyn called, her voice trembling. "Alexander, you must protect the name." His reply was ice. "You already destroyed it." He hung up, her sob echoing. For the first time, the Pierce name felt not like inheritance, but curse. Alexander looked out at the city skyline. "If Pierce Global falls," he muttered, "let it fall. Truth matters more than legacy." His war had begun. Hale's private office. Richard Hale studied the boardroom reports, satisfaction curling his lips. Alexander was cornered. Public opinion shifting. Investors uneasy. But Hale wasn't satisfied with corporate victory. He wanted destruction. He picked up the phone, dialing his enforcer. The boy, make sure he knows fear. Just enough to keep Rachel quiet. The voice on the other end confirmed coldly. Hale hung up, sipping whiskey, whispering, "Family, the Achilles heel of every empire." His eyes narrowed. "Pierce thinks he can fight me with love? Love breaks faster than contracts." Yet even as he gloated, a flicker of unease crossed his features. Daniel was innocent. Rachel walked Daniel to school, her eyes darting around nervously. A black car idled near the corner. She gripped his hand tighter. "Mommy, why are we walking so fast?" he asked innocently. She forced a smile. "We're racing. Come on." They hurried inside, Rachel's heart pounding. Hours later, she found a note slipped into Daniel's backpack. "Stay away from Pierce or he pays." Tears blurred her eyes. Fear pressed down like a storm. She realized Hale wouldn't hesitate to use Daniel as leverage. Her son's innocence had become a weapon in someone else's war, and she couldn't protect him alone. Alexander's apartment. Alexander sat with files scattered, Rachel's words echoing in his mind. "I thought you were part of it." He clenched his fists. He had failed her once. He wouldn't again. His phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice was raw, broken. They threatened Daniel. "I can't do this anymore." His chest clenched. "Rachel, listen. Hale forged everything. I found proof. My father's signature, my mother's, Hale's. You were right, but I'll fix this." Silence stretched before Rachel whispered, "If you fail, we all fall." Alexander's voice steadied, steel hard. "Then I'll make sure Hale falls first. I swear it, Rachel." That night, Alexander walked into the boardroom carrying a folder thicker than any speech. Eyes followed him warily. Hale smirked, confident. But Alexander slammed the documents on the table, his voice steady. "These are my father's contracts. My mother's signatures. Hale's forgeries. This company was built on lies. No more." Gasps erupted. Hale's smile faltered for the first time. "You're finished," he hissed. Alexander leaned forward, eyes burning. "No, Richard, you are." The boardroom erupted in chaos, but Alexander didn't flinch. For the first time in years, he wasn't his father's shadow. He was a man ready to fight. Hale's office. Richard Hale sat behind his desk, smoke curling from a cigar, eyes glinting with malice. The board's panic had rattled him, but not broken him. He called his enforcer. "Increase pressure. Follow Rachel. Make Pierce bleed where it hurts most." The man nodded silently. Hale leaned back, whispering, "Family," his one weakness. He tapped a folder of photographs. Daniel at school, Rachel leaving work, Alexander watching helplessly. Hale smirked. If he insists on playing hero, let him learn what heroes lose first. He poured himself another drink, but beneath his smirk, his hand trembled. Fear was an intruder he despised. Rachel walked Daniel home from school when a black car screeched to a halt. Two men stepped out, eyes cold. "Get in," one hissed. Rachel froze, clutching Daniel tight. Panic shot through her veins. Suddenly, a passerby rounded the corner, forcing the men to retreat into the car. It sped off, tires screeching. Rachel collapsed against the wall, heart racing. Daniel clung to her, whispering, "Mommy, I'm scared." Tears blurred her vision. She had run once to escape this nightmare, but Hale had found her again. She knew then there was no more running. The storm had come to her doorstep. Alexander's penthouse. Alexander slammed his fist against the desk as the security chief delivered the report. They went after Rachel and Daniel. The man said grimly. Rage consumed Alexander. Hale crossed the line. He grabbed his phone, calling Rachel. Her voice shook. They tried to take him. "Alex, I can't." "You won't fight this alone," he cut in firmly. "I'll protect you both. Hale wants war. He'll have it." Rachel hesitated. Fear etched in her tone. "If you fail, Daniel pays." Alexander's eyes burned. "Then I won't fail." Determination hardened him. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for legacy. He was fighting for love. Hale convened an emergency meeting, smearing Alexander with lies. "He's reckless. He risks us all with baseless accusations." The board murmured, torn between fear and loyalty. Alexander stormed in, eyes blazing. He threw documents onto the table. My father's contracts, Hale's forgeries, Evelyn's silence. "Look at them." Gasps filled the room as pages passed. Hale sneered. "Fabrications." Alexander stepped closer, voice thunderous. "You've built this company on poison. Families are dead. My son nearly taken. It ends tonight." The board fractured, some siding with Alexander, others clinging to Hale. The empire wavered, balanced on the edge of truth and destruction. Evelyn's mansion. Evelyn poured wine, hands trembling. Alexander stormed in, fury radiating. "They nearly took Daniel. And your silence helped this." Evelyn's tears spilled. "I thought I was protecting you, Alex. Your father," he demanded it. His voice cracked with rage. "He's dead, Mother. But his sins still choke us because you signed them too." Evelyn collapsed into her chair, sobbing. "I didn't want to lose the family name." Alexander's jaw hardened. "You lost your family anyway." His words cut like ice. For the first time, Evelyn realized the Pierce name wasn't legacy. It was curse, and her silence was its coffin. Rachel packed bags that night, trembling as she folded Daniel's clothes. "Mommy, are we moving again?" he asked innocently. She swallowed hard, just for safety. But deep inside, she knew running solved nothing. Hale's reach was endless. Her phone buzzed, Alexander's message. "Trust me. Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow. I'll end this." Rachel stared at the screen, torn. She had left once because she believed Alexander was blind. Now he was awake, furious, ready to fight. She whispered to Daniel, "Maybe this time we don't run." Tears burned her eyes. Hope was dangerous, but she couldn't silence it anymore. Hale's apartment. Richard Hale met with his lawyer, outlining plans. "If Pierce pushes us to court, we bury him in countersuits. We'll paint him unfit, Unstable compromise. The lawyer nodded grimly. Hale smirked. And if Rachel testifies, we expose her past. Running away, hiding the boy, she'll look unreliable. He lit a cigar, smoke coiling like venom. I control the board, the press, the regulators. Pierce thinks truth wins in court. Truth is paper. Power is ink. But as he poured another drink, his reflection wavered. For the first time, doubt stared back at him, whispering that Alexander might finally be dangerous. The courthouse buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashing as Alexander strode inside. Rachel reluctantly by his side. Daniel shielded by security. Headlines screamed, Pierce Empire under fire. Alexander stood tall, files in hand. I'll expose them all, he whispered. Rachel glanced at him, torn but hopeful. Inside, Hale's attorney smirked, confident. Yet as evidence mounted, contracts, signatures, testimonies, the tide shifted. Rachel's voice broke on the stand. I left because I fear for my son's life. I begged for help. Evelyn silenced me. Gasps echoed. For the first time, the courtroom saw not scandal, but a mother's desperate truth. Courtroom chaos. Hale's defense unraveled under the weight of evidence. Documents revealed forgeries, financial trails leading straight to his accounts. Evelyn sat pale, tears streaking her face as her signatures appeared on screen. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order as reporters scribbled furiously. Hale's composure cracked, sweat beading his forehead. Alexander turned, locking eyes with him. You ruined family for profit. You nearly destroyed mine. This ends now. Hale sneered, but his voice faltered. You're a fool, Alex. The empire is mine. Alexander stepped closer, voice steady. Not anymore. I'll rebuild from the ashes, but without your blood on my hands. The verdict wasn't delivered that day, but the world had already chosen sides. News outlets broadcast Rachel's testimony, Alexander's defiance, and Hale's unraveling. Investors fled, Pierce Global stock plummeted, and the empire Charles Pierce Sr. built cracked at its core. Evelyn locked herself away, drowning in guilt. Hale sat in his penthouse, glass shaking in his hand, realizing power was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Alexander held Daniel's hand outside the courthouse, whispering, I'll keep you safe now. Rachel stood beside them, hesitant but closer than before. For the first time in years, the future felt possible, fragile, alive. Hale's penthouse. Richard Hale stared out at the city's skyline, glass shaking in his grip. News anchors replayed Rachel's testimony, Alexander's defiance, and shareholders abandoning ship. His empire was collapsing. Slamming the glass against the wall, he barked into the phone. Pull every string. Judges, regulators, buy them all. His enforcer hesitated. It won't matter. The world already saw. Hale's jaw tightened, veins throbbing. Then make them fear me again. He hung up, staring at his reflection. For the first time, he saw not power, but a man cornered. Rage swallowed him whole. He had only one card left, desperation. And desperation kills. Paparazzi swarmed outside Evelyn Pierce's mansion, shouting questions. Did you sign contracts covering up deaths? Why silence your daughter-in-law? Evelyn drew the curtains, hands trembling. Her pearls felt like chains around her neck. She collapsed into a chair, remembering Rachel's tearful pleas years ago. Her silence had protected wealth, not family. Now the world knew. Headlines branded her complicit. Her image shattered. She whispered to herself, I only wanted to preserve the name. But the Pierce name was ashes now. She realized too late that legacy without love was empty. Guilt consumed her, louder than the cameras outside her gates. Courtroom aftermath. Alexander exited the courthouse, Daniel clutching his hand, Rachel close behind. Reporters swarmed, questions overlapping. Mr. Pierce, do you admit your father's crimes? Alexander paused, eyes steady. My father built an empire of poison. Richard Hale continued it. My mother enabled it. I won't. Gasps rippled. Cameras flashing furiously. Rachel's chest tightened. He had finally spoken truth aloud, no longer shielded by wealth or shame. Daniel tugged his father's sleeve. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Alexander knelt, smiling faintly. "No, son, we're fixing trouble." For the first time, Rachel saw him not as his father's heir, but as his own man. That evening, Rachel returned to her apartment with Daniel, only to find the door ajar again. Panic surged. Inside, drawers were overturned, paper scattered. On the wall, a single word sprayed in red: leave. Rachel froze, clutching Daniel tightly, her heart thundering. Alexander arrived minutes later, security swarming the building. Fury blazed in his eyes. Hale did this. He's escalating. Rachel trembled. He won't stop until we're gone. Alexander's voice hardened. Then we don't hide, we fight. Daniel clung to them both, wide-eyed. For the first time, the three of them stood together, united not just by love, but survival. Hale's last gambit. Hale met with his dwindling circle of allies in a smoky backroom. "We can still bury him," he hissed. One lawyer shook his head. "The evidence is overwhelming." Hale slammed the table. "Then destroy it. Burn the files, bribe the witnesses, silence Rachel Lawson if you have to." Nervous glances flickered. Even his loyalists saw the cracks. Hale leaned forward, eyes burning. "Pierce thinks he can rebuild. I'll make sure there's nothing left of him to rebuild with." His voice dropped to a growl. "If the empire burns, I'll take them all into the fire with me." Rachel sat in the hospital chapel, hands clasped, Daniel asleep in her lap. For years she lived in fear, silenced by Evelyn, threatened by Hale. But testifying had lit something inside her. She whispered, "No more running." When Alexander entered quietly, she looked up. "They want me silent again. But I won't be. I'll fight with you." His chest swelled with pride, relief softening his eyes. "We'll fight together." For the first time, she didn't see him as part of the empire, but as her partner again. Hope flickered between them, fragile yet strong enough to face the storm. Evelyn's confession. Alone in her mansion, Evelyn recorded a video message, tears staining her cheeks. "This is my confession. Charles Pierce built our empire on addiction. I signed documents to hide it. I silenced Rachel when she begged for help. I betrayed my son." Her voice cracked. "Alexander, if you see this, I pray you forgive me. But if not, at least Daniel will know the truth." She ended the recording, collapsing in sobs. The video would leak hours later, devastating the board and shattering Hale's last defense. For once, Evelyn chose truth, but far too late to save her own name. News outlets exploded with Evelyn's confession. Anchors replayed her tearful words, analysts declaring Pierce Global unsalvageable, investors abandoned completely, stock plummeting to historic lows. Hale raged, smashing glass in his office, as Alexander held a press conference. Cameras flashed as he declared, "Pierce Global will be dismantled, its assets sold, proceeds directed to families harmed by its products." The crowd erupted. Rachel stood beside him, Daniel in her arms. For the first time, truth was louder than corruption. Hale's empire was ashes now, and Alexander had chosen justice over wealth. But Hale wasn't finished. Desperation sharpened into violence. Hale's final move, cornered. Hale abandoned lawyers and shareholders. He called his enforcer, voice shaking with rage. "One last job. Take the boy." Silence on the line. Then, "That's too far, Richard." Hale roared, "Do it." Pierce took everything. "I'll take his future." The call ended abruptly, leaving Hale alone with his fury. He paced his penthouse, paranoia tightening around him. Shadows seemed to move across the walls. For years, he controlled everything. Now, he was powerless, hunted by the very empire he built. His reflection sneered back at him, a desperate man clinging to ashes. And ashes cannot be ruled forever. Alexander drove Rachel and Daniel to a safe house guarded by federal agents. The Justice Department had stepped in, seizing Hale's accounts, freezing assets, preparing indictments. Rachel clutched Daniel, exhaustion in her eyes. "Is it over?" she whispered. Alexander shook his head. "Not yet. Hale won't go quietly." He looked at Daniel, asleep in the back seat, and whispered fiercely, "But I'll keep him safe, whatever it takes." Rachel placed a trembling hand over his. For the first time, she believed him. The storm had nearly broken them, but together they were stronger. Tomorrow, Hale's final chapter will be written in fire. Hale's penthouse. Richard Hale's empire smoldered. Federal agents froze accounts, seized records, and raided offices. He paced like a caged animal. Phone silent, allies vanished. His reflection sneered back at him, mocking the king-turned-beggar. The knock on the door came sharp final. Hale's last loyal enforcer entered, eyes downcast. "They're coming for you, Richard." Hale snarled, "Then we strike first." But even his voice betrayed fear. The man hesitated, then walked out, leaving him alone. Hale realized too late. Power wasn't loyalty, it was rented fear. And rent had come due. Sirens wailed below, climbing toward his hollow throne. Federal agents stormed Hale's penthouse, their jackets glowing in the dim light. "Richard Hale, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering," one declared. Hale laughed bitterly, cuffed hands trembling. "You think truth wins? Truth bends." He spat the words, but no one flinched. Cameras captured his downfall as neighbors whispered from balconies. For years, he had silenced others. Now silence swallowed him. The city he controlled with paper, and fear finally saw him shackled. As he was led away, Hale's smirk faltered. For the first time in his life, power didn't follow him out the door. Only disgrace. Evelyn's collapse. News of Hale's arrest spread quickly, but Evelyn Pierce remained locked in her mansion. Reporters crowded outside, shouting accusations. Inside, she watched endless replays of her own confession, her trembling voice filling the room. Her pearls lay shattered on the floor. She whispered, "Charles, what have we done?" Memories flooded, Rachel begging, Alexander pleading, Daniel's face. She realized her silence hadn't preserved anything. It had destroyed everything. For the first time, Evelyn wrote a letter addressed to her son and grandson. "Forgive me if you can. I was weak." She folded it, weeping. Redemption had arrived too late for her. Alexander held a press conference. Rachel by his side. Daniel perched on her hip. The world waited, cameras flashing. He spoke firmly, voice steady. "Pierce Global is finished. Its assets will be liquidated, and proceeds given to families harmed." Gasps erupted, reporters scrambling. Rachel's chest swelled. He had chosen justice, not power. Alexander looked at her, then at Daniel, whispering privately, "We'll rebuild, not an empire, but a family." The crowd roared, but for Alexander, the noise faded. Only two faces mattered now. For years, he had lived as his father's heir. Today, he chose to be Daniel's father instead. Quiet evening. The safe house was quiet for once. Rachel sat on the couch, Daniel asleep between them, his small breath steady. Alexander broke the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I'll spend every day proving I'm not my father." Rachel studied him, tears glistening. "I left because I thought you'd become him. But tonight, I saw you fight him, even in death." Alexander's throat tightened. "I lost you once. I won't lose you again." For the first time in years, Rachel leaned against his shoulder. Fragile, hesitant, but real. Love stirred again, not blind, but forged in fire and survival. The next morning, Daniel bounded into the kitchen, hair tousled, eyes bright. "Daddy, can we have pancakes?" Alexander smiled, warmth flooding his chest. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "He doesn't forget promises." Alexander rolled up his sleeves, fumbling with batter, laughter filling the safe house. Daniel clapped, delighted. Rachel watched, heart aching with relief. For years, she had protected him alone. Now, for the first time, they were together, not perfect, not unscarred, but whole. She whispered silently, "Thank you." Sometimes healing didn't come from verdicts or headlines. Sometimes it came from a 5-year-old demanding pancakes on a Saturday morning. Evelyn's letter. Days later, Alexander received Evelyn's letter. His hands trembled as he read her shaky handwriting. I failed you. I failed Rachel. I failed Daniel. I thought silence protected us, but it killed us. Please let him know his grandmother loved him, even in weakness. Alexander closed his eyes, tears falling silently. Rachel placed a hand over his. You don't have to forgive her now. He nodded slowly. I may never, but Daniel deserves truth. He folded the letter carefully, deciding he'd tell his son one day. For now, forgiveness wasn't for Evelyn. It was for Daniel's future. Reporters called it the biggest corporate collapse of the decade. Families called it long overdue justice. Alexander called it freedom. He sold his penthouse, moved into a modest townhouse near Rachel and Daniel. No guards, no marble walls, just laughter, cooking smells, and secondhand furniture that reminded him of their beginnings. One night, Rachel asked, "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. Empires crumble. Love rebuilds. She smiled faintly, leaning against him. For the first time in years, Alexander slept soundly, not because the world forgave him, but because the two people who mattered most let him stay. Months later, Rachel stood in a new clinic she helped open, funded by liquidated Pierce assets. Families lined the hallways, grateful. She glanced outside. Alexander and Daniel played catch on the lawn, laughter ringing. Tears filled her eyes. She had once fled with nothing but fear. Now she stood with purpose. Alexander entered, smiling. It's beautiful. You built this. She shook her head. We built this out of ashes. For the first time, she didn't see him as Charles Pierce's son or Evelyn's heir. She saw him as a man who chose differently. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Richard Hale's trial began months later. Courtrooms packed, reporters buzzing. Evidence crushed his defense. Forged signatures, laundered money, witness intimidation. Evelyn's confession video played, damning him further. The jury returned swiftly, guilty on all counts. As he was led away, Hale sneered at Alexander in the gallery. This isn't victory. It's survival. Alexander met his glare calmly. Then I'll survive for them. Hale spat, dragged away. Rachel squeezed Alexander's hand. The nightmare was over, though scars remained. Power had finally bowed to truth. Hale's name would be forgotten, but Daniel's laughter would echo longer than any empire. That was true justice. A family dinner. Weeks later, Rachel set the table, Daniel bouncing excitedly. Daddy, hurry, it's taco night. Alexander entered, smiling, sleeves rolled up. The kitchen smelled of cumin and roasted peppers. For the first time in years, dinner wasn't silence or tension. It was laughter, jokes, Daniel's endless questions. Rachel caught Alexander's gaze across the table. For a moment, they were just a family. Not survivors, not warriors, just people learning to live again. Alexander whispered quietly, "Thank you for not giving up." Rachel smiled softly. "We both almost did, but he kept us alive." They looked at Daniel, their anchor and future. Rachel and Alexander walked Daniel to school hand in hand. Other parents smiled, unaware of the storms behind them. Alexander carried Daniel's backpack, joking about math homework. Rachel watched, heartwarming. Trust was fragile, but growing. Later that evening, she admitted softly, "Part of me still fears it all could return." Alexander cupped her hand. "Fear keeps us alert. Love keeps us alive." She kissed him lightly for the first time in years. It wasn't the end of pain, but the beginning of something new. Hope finally outweighed fear, and that was all they needed to move forward. Evelyn's final days. Evelyn withdrew from society, her mansion quiet, curtains drawn. She lived out her days in solitude, haunted by memories of signatures and silence. Sometimes she called Alexander, leaving voicemails of apologies he couldn't bear to return. Daniel visited once, Rachel accompanying him. Evelyn wept, holding his small hands. "I loved you, even when I failed." The boy tilted his head, innocent. Then, "Don't fail anymore, Grandma." Evelyn broke, sobbing. Alexander chose not to attend, but Rachel allowed the visits. Forgiveness was complicated, but Daniel's innocence softened what bitterness never could. In him, Evelyn glimpsed redemption she'd never earned. Spring arrived, blossoms scattering across city sidewalks. Rachel opened the clinic doors officially, cutting the ribbon as families cheered. Alexander stood beside her, Daniel perched on his shoulders. The building was modest, but inside lived hope, free treatment programs, counseling, education. This is for the families who never had a chance, Rachel said proudly. Cameras clicked, but for once, headlines celebrated healing, not scandal. Alexander smiled, whispering, "Your dream built this." Rachel corrected him softly. "Our survival built this." Daniel clapped, declaring, "Mommy's the boss." Laughter erupted. For the first time, their story wasn't about running. It was about staying. Quiet night, Alexander tucked Daniel into bed, listening to his soft breathing. Rachel leaned against the doorway, arms folded, smiling faintly. Alexander whispered, "Do you ever wonder if he'll know the whole story?" Rachel sighed. "Someday, but not yet. Let him be a child first." Alexander nodded, brushing Daniel's hair gently. "He saved me without knowing it." Rachel's eyes glistened. "He saved us both." Later, they sat on the balcony, city lights glowing. For years, their nights were filled with distance and fear. Now, silence was gentle, filled with peace. Sometimes the loudest victories were quiet, written in the heart's language. Though Hale was gone, memories lingered. Rachel still woke from nightmares of black cars. Alexander sometimes froze at his father's name in headlines. Evelyn's shadow haunted them all. But scars weren't weakness. They were proof of survival. Together, they built routines. Pancakes on Saturdays, park trips on Sundays, movie nights curled under blankets. Healing wasn't instant, but daily. Rachel once whispered, "I used to think love was fragile." Alexander replied, "Love is stronger than empire." She kissed his hand. Their wounds would never vanish, but love stitched around them, slowly transforming pain into the foundation of something unshakable. Graduation day. Years passed. Daniel stood in cap and gown, eyes sparkling. Rachel and Alexander sat in the audience, pride swelling. Cameras flashed as Daniel crossed the stage, receiving his diploma. "That's our boy," Alexander whispered, voice thick with tears. Rachel squeezed his hand, smiling through hers. Daniel spotted them, grinning, and mouthed, "I love you." They waved, hearts bursting. For years, they had fought wars against shadows, lies, and legacy. Now, the future stood before them, bright and unburdened. Alexander whispered, "He'll never carry our scars." Rachel nodded softly, "Because we carried them for him." The cycle had finally broken. That night, sitting by the fire, Daniel asked softly, "Daddy, where were you when I was little?" Silence filled the room. Alexander swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I was lost, son, lost in lies I didn't see. But I found my way back to you." Daniel hugged him tightly. "Then don't get lost again." Alexander held him close, whispering, "Never." Rachel watched, tears shining, heart finally at peace. Empires had fallen, secrets exposed, families broken. But here, in this room, love had won. The story ended not in marble towers, but in laughter, healing, and the unshakable bond of family reborn.